Hi, I'm Wendy Dodd. I'm Wendy Dodd, and I am the Montana Regional Rep for the Rocky Mountain Goat Alliance. Hope everyone here is a member or is considering becoming a member. But in Montana, we have funded numerous projects, but we've done collars for the goats here in Montana. And we also do quite a few goat counts and help FWP with those. So if you are interested in counting goats in Montana, you can put your name over and leave me a message, and I'll add you to my email list when those opportunities become available. But I think Stacy already mentioned, just keep your computers on mute so we can hear Michele. And I would just like to introduce our guest tonight, speaker, Michele. I'm excited to hear about working dogs for conservation, so I will let you take it away.
All right, thank you. All right, can you guys see that?
Yes, we can see your screen, but it's not in, there we go. Now it's in presentation mode. Yep.
All right. All right, so yeah, my name is Michele Lovara. I've got a bachelor's from the University of Minnesota, and I'm currently doing my master's at South Dakota State. I've been doing wildlife for about a little over 10 years. I also ran sled dogs for years. And I've done a lot of different projects. Primarily, I've kind of worked with carnivores, so wolves, coyotes, bobcats, that kind of thing. But yeah, I've done a lot of cool stuff, and now I'm with Working Dogs for Conservation. I've been there for about 3 years and working on some of the projects with them. So conservation dogs, I'm just going to talk a little bit about WD4C and kind of who we are as an organization and some of the work we've done, just so you guys can kind of get familiar with the concept of conservation dogs. So as a lot of people know, detection dogs have been used for years. They kind of started as hunting dogs. Humans have been using them for probably thousands of years to do this kind of work, but it's become more of like an actual field of study now, where people are using them to find oil and drugs, cancer, human remains, and also disease. And the field has kind of expanded into conservation work. And this started by WD4C, were the first organization that started this kind of thing about 20 years ago. And they were using these dogs to find carnivores and other elusive animals that humans were having a hard time finding. And they've shown that they're really good at that. They find live animals, they can find scats, they do invasive plants. We've used them to find GPS units, which you guys know is a big money-saving thing. And now we're kind of using them to find wildlife disease too. So these are just some of the projects that I've worked on and with some of my dogs that I thought you guys might like to see. So up there in the corner, you can kind of see we do some black-footed ferret work. These are one of the projects where the dogs actually will find the live animal down in the hole. GPS collars don't work underground, so it's really difficult to find these guys, but the dogs are super good at it. And then some of the other projects that I do, the black lab here is Charlie. He does bear work, ferrets. He's also doing kit fox, which is another endangered animal. With those, he's finding the scats. And then the little brown and white dog there, that's Frost, and he does some invasive plant work with me. He also works up on the reservation with me finding mink and otter scat. And that project's pretty cool because we're actually using the scats to find contamination in the environment. And then we also have a program in Africa where we do a lot of anti-poaching stuff, and we're kind of expanding that into Asia as well. So dogs as a conservation tool are actually extremely good. They have 100% accuracy in some of the studies, and they did a review where they did 542 different studies where they used dogs as a tool, and they found that about 89% of the time, the dogs are actually outperforming human searchers. And the couple of times where dogs ended up being worse or mixed, if you look into the reviews, it actually had to do with like human errors and training. So overall, dogs are just really killing it in this conservation field. They're really fast, they are inexpensive, and they're actually really accurate. And then why we specifically use dogs is because of how accurate they are. As I said, humans have been using dogs for disease detection and explosives and things like that. And they found that the dogs actually have a detection limit that's a lot lower than some of these really expensive laboratory equipment that they're using. And so dogs have been used to find cancer, diabetes, infectious disease, all this kind of stuff. And so it's really not a stretch for us to think, why don't we start using these dogs to look at wildlife disease as well? Because like I said, they're really cheap, inexpensive. We can get them in the field where a lot of lab equipment can't go. And also they have the plus of that they do this work just because they think it's fun. So now I'm going to kind of move into some of this work that I'm doing for my master's right now. And that is using the dogs to detect Mycoplasma ovinemoniae in bighorn sheep at captures. And also we're hoping to use it as a non-invasive field method. So I'm just going to kind of tell you about the benefits of why we're using dogs, how we're training them, and then I'm going to give you some of our current progress so far. So I won't spend too much time on this because I'm guessing you guys all kind of know what Mycoplasma ovinemoniae is. But yeah, it's a bacteria that domestic sheep are kind of giving to wild sheep. And it's pretty bad when it gets into these wild animals. And one of our study sites is in the Badlands, and we actually have like 4 domestic operations right outside of the national park. And about every year they bring in new rams that have a different strain of MOVI, and it just keeps going through the population and wiping them out over and over again. And they're looking at these chronic carriers and different die-offs that are happening there. But this is, as you know, a problem that's kind of happening all over the US, and it's quite the problem to deal with. So the current testing methods that they have, we've got ELISA and PCR, but they're expensive and they can take weeks for results. Some of our tests that we sent in last year, we took 3 weeks to 6 weeks to get back. And as you know, that can be kind of a problem when you're trying to manage a disease that's really fast paced. And it would be really helpful if there was a method that you could take out in the field and just let you know if these sheep were sick or not. And also, we're hoping there's some other methods that are looking at doing in-field testing, but they're also kind of expensive and they're still undergoing some validation. So for managers to really effectively manage this disease, it would be great for a new field method like dogs to come in. And then this picture is from our South Dakota captures last year. So how we're doing this is we're training dogs in these scent discrimination trials. If you see that picture there in the middle, we've got our dog Kovu, and he's running around this wheel. So as you can see, each one of those wheels has a port on the end. And in that, there's like a can, and we put a different scent in each one of those cans. So we try to do like a positive scat, and then we do a negative scat from the same population. And then we also have a negative scat from Wild Horse Island in Montana, where sheep have never been infected with MOVI. So we kind of use that as our control in case some of these animals, you know, they may be testing negative, but they could have like just gotten over the disease, and we don't really know if there's something going on with their microbiome still after like a really recent infection. And then some of the other ones have just like other animal scat in them. We also have like a swab that we use to wipe the dog's nose, and then we put that in there to kind of trick them. Because something that they will do is if another dog has sniffed and alerted at a port, they actually can release pheromones, and it can cue the other dogs in to know that that was like the right port. So there's like all these different tricky things we do, gloves, that kind of stuff in these different cans. And we just try to give the dogs as many different options as possible. And we actually kind of try to trip them up. And then we see how accurate they are when they go around and if they can find the correct scat that we're looking for. And another thing that we have to do when we do that, if you look at that picture on the left, you'll see Finn there kind of waiting. We have this room set up and we have cameras and stuff in there and computers, and then everyone's outside of the room because we, as humans and dogs, are used to working together. And those dogs really look to us for clues. So if I was in that room and I was sending Finn and she noticed that I was kind of looking at one of these cans, like say I kind of was like looking at the positive one, she'd immediately cue in on that and would get a better score. And we don't want that. We don't want them like, you know, learning from us in that way. So just to make sure that we actually are training these dogs to find these scats properly, we have to do this double blind. And so that's why this setup is like this. And the person that is sending the dog doesn't know which can it's in, so they can't cue them or anything. And then they walk outside of the room. And then the only person that actually knows where the scat is the person that put it in there. And then we have this person that's sitting outside of there kind of watching on the camera. And she's the one that actually says when the dog alerts. And I just wanted to show you how that actually happens since it's kind of confusing. So yeah, as you kind of see there, we tell the dog to go find it. And then when she does find it, the person that sent her calls it out. And then the one person that knows the answer says like, was it in this port? And they say, yep. And then that's when this dog gets her reward. So her reward is a toy, you know, or some dogs get food. It just kind of depends on the dog. And this dog is actually doing cultures here. So that's one of the things that we train them on. So these are the three different things that we train them on is the cultures, which is just like bacterial cultures of Moby. And then we also are kind of trying to train them on the swabs that we take at captures. And that picture there is from our captures in Nebraska this past year. And then the third way is the scats, as I kind of mentioned. We're really interested in the scats because that would be the only non-invasive way to test for this disease. But we have had some dogs working on cultures and it's gone really well. So we hope that there's some kind of a thing that we can do where maybe we train dogs on cultures and we train them on scats. And so that's kind of what we're working on right now is doing some different cross training between these different things. Because our hope is that if the dogs are trained on cultures, if we go out and we are at captures and they're taking these swabs, we can also immediately tell them from the swab if the animal has Moby or not, or is shedding the bacteria actively. Whereas with scats, it's a little harder, you know, when you're doing non-invasive stuff to know individuals and stuff. So yeah, so currently, this has actually kind of changed a little bit, but so we've got 2 dogs that are successfully trained on bacterial cultures, and we are currently training 2 more. And then we have 3 dogs that we trained on domestic scats. And we are training those 2 dogs that we trained on bacterial cultures now onto the domestic or wild scats as well. And we moved the dogs from the domestic scats over onto bighorn sheep scats to see if there was a possibility of cross-training dogs with domestics, just since it's much easier to source fresh scats than it is with bighorns. And we found that that wasn't really possible. There was a huge learning curve, and we basically ended up having to retrain them on the wild scats anyways. And that's not, it wasn't like a setback or anything, but it's good for us to know that that we just have to start with bighorn sheep scats in the beginning. We think it could have to do with the fact that bighorns have maybe more diseases than some of the domestics had. Some of our bighorn sheep scats came back with EHD and Mannheimia. So, you know, there's just this whole other added category of diseases in wild animals that weren't existing in the domestics. So we do think that that was probably part of it. And then right now we're treating dogs on these ELISA positive, PCR positive, and then ELISA negative and PCR negative scats. And so that's been kind of difficult because we collected about 160 scats from captures last year. And of those, we could only use 39 from Nebraska and 59 from South Dakota. Because we're really thinking this PCR positive and ELISA positive is kind of meaning that these animals have an active infection going on, whereas if they're negative, we know they've really cleared the bacteria, as opposed to animals that are maybe ELISA positive and PCR negative. But that's our next step this year. We'll start training dogs on some of those harder samples as we go on. And we're also collecting more samples here. Just next week, we'll be headed out to captures. And yeah, then we're partnering with a few different states and provinces. I'll say Idaho has actually sent us a good amount of samples, and then BC has sent us some samples as well. But yeah, all the people that we can get, it's helpful. And then I just wanted to show you some of the results from our scat and culture trials. So we calculate things using sensitivity, specificity, and accuracy. So we want to make sure that the dogs find it, that they ignore those negative samples that I had mentioned we put in there. And then just what the combination of that is, that's the metrics that we're using to kind of assess these dogs. And so you can see on the cultures, they did extremely well. They really nailed that. And then the scats, the domestic scats, they did a little worse, but they were still doing pretty well. So that's kind of why we were thinking if we can train them on these cultures and then do nasal swabs, we might have like a more accurate method than scats, even though the scats would be nice because it's non-invasive. And then this is our bighorn sheep scat trial. So we actually spent about 5 months training them on these scats before this. This was kind of just our testing dates. And as you can see, they kind of go up and down, but there's kind of a slight decline. And what we think that was is that by the time we started this testing, you can see that's July. And so these scats were, they were gotten in February and March. And so by this point, they're, you know, like 5 months old. And we think that there was kind of a die-off date of the bacteria. And so we're kind of realizing how important it is that these samples are fresh. And that's just good for us to know too, you know, out on the landscape and stuff. If we want to be doing this scat research and non-invasive sampling, it's good for us to know at what point the scats aren't really viable anymore. And then you can also kind of see there's a couple days that are outliers where the dogs did good or bad. We know for like a fact, like on those bad days, there was like a dog in the parking lot barking that was kind of distracting the dogs. So, you know, they are dogs, they're not machines. And so we do kind of have those off days, but overall, we feel like the dogs do perform at a pretty good level most of the time. So, and that's just something that we have to take into consideration as we move these dogs into the field trials here. So this year, the dogs are coming out to captures, and we're going to have them just practice working in this like new crazy environment. And that's just part of training, is to make sure that your dogs can work in different environments. And that is going to help us get these precision averages to go up. And then here's some pictures from captures last year. It was great. We went out to Nebraska and South Dakota. We caught a ton of sheep and we had a lot of fun, and we got to get our hands on some sheep, which was cool. And the dogs, we have this little setup. I didn't take a picture of it, but we trailer, and then that we have that wheel that I showed you is set up inside the trailer so that we can run the dogs inside, and we park them about half a mile away from this base camp and where captures are happening, so that they're not interfering. They're never like coming up to these animals and sniffing them. They're also trained to not like be barking and that kind of thing. So we don't think that there's any stress on the animals that's added by the dogs. So future directions, we just want to continue training this bighorn sheep scent training, both the scat and the swabs. And then we're adding more dogs just so that we can get better numbers and get that precision up. And then we also are working with some other researchers to explore some different odor mechanisms. So we're working with a microbiologist out of MSU who's doing microbiome on all these samples and is looking at also adding new primers to test PCR. And she actually just messaged me last night and said that she tested her new primers and they worked extremely well. And she was able to get some of the indeterminants to actually read positive. So that was really interesting. And then the microbiome we're obviously interested in because with the scats, that's what the dogs are smelling. So if we can see if there's some kind of different odor signatures or anything, that could be a new tool for managers as well. And then we're also just hoping we can kind of refine the capture event stuff for the dogs, as we have them in their little trailer and how they do and all that. And then we also want to do some more aging experiments. As I said, the scat kind of had a little bit of a shelf life on it, and the dogs started not recognizing it after a certain amount of months. So what we want to do is kind of age some of those scats, and so we can actually tell how fresh the dogs need them and see if there's like really a die-off period for that bacteria. And if there's a point at which the dogs are really getting it good, and then we know kind of how to manage that in the field. And then we also just want to compare some of the different accuracy methods, hopefully. And then, yeah, we also want to train them on some different species of bighorn and possibly some other animals that get movie as well. Another project we're kind of looking into is maybe bison movie. And we're going to train the dogs kind of in similar ways that we are training the sheep dogs. So yeah, just in summary, detection dogs are great. They're a great tool, and they could offer a really good complementary tool for this movie screening. And if they are successful, they would be one of the fastest and most effective tools for this whole system. And we think that it's possible both at captures and non-invasively. And if they can do it non-invasively, it would be the only non-invasive method. And then I just wanted to give a special thanks to some of the people that have helped me on this project and worked with me. And obviously big thanks to Kevin and Wild Sheep Foundation for funding this project, and our other partners as well for sending us samples and working with us, because we could not do it without them. And then here's 3 of our little sheep dogs. So yeah, I'll open it up if anybody has any questions about anything.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michele. I personally have a question, more so about like the dogs. Like, where do you source them from? Is there like favorite breeds? Who owns them? Or like,
So yeah, our organization owns almost all of them. There's a couple of them, like that golden retriever there. She actually is our head trainer's personal dog. She used to do human remains with her until she got this job. So she kind of career change switched, and we do have a couple of those dogs that belong to people, and then when they came here they switched careers. But overall the organization owns them, and where we get them is actually usually from shelters. They tend to be these really high drive dogs that nobody wants, and so they end up in a shelter because they're annoying. And that's perfect for us because we want dogs that just don't know when to say quit, you know. And most of them are kind of hunting dogs, that kind of thing. We get a lot of lab mixes, but we've got a few golden retrievers, and we've got some pit bulls and stuff as well. So a lot of mixed breeds. Just as long as they're crazy and they love a toy and they don't want to kill little animals, they work for us.
cool. Yeah, that's really cool. I really, I think it's like such a cool concept and a cool like business that it ends up being. Neat.
So a comment, if I can make, Stacy,
Sure.
is, one of the things that Michele and Pete and Amy and the Working Dogs folks have come up with is I'm going to call it a half-page set of instructions on how to collect and preserve these samples. And so, just here in the next month, there's probably going to be 300 to 500 bighorns caught in the West. I don't think that many goats are being caught, but where they are catching goats, I'm just wondering if that same protocol could be disseminated to, the biologists, and maybe they're the same ones, like in Idaho, the same, BC, the same, but get that out there just so that they can collect and preserve some samples, and maybe they would be of benefit and use to working dogs.
Yeah, you guys have Movian goats, right?
Yeah, it is a concern.
Okay.
No, I think that could be a like a great collaborative opportunity.
And
But
so
all right.
just putting your thinking cap on, Stacy or whoever, you know,
Mhm.
in the next month or so, or maybe in the past month or two, how many goats around the West are actually going to be laid hands on? Is it dozens or is it?
That I have no idea.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm not sure on that one.
that might
But
be something, you know, and I
mhm,
self-volunteer on the RMGA Science and Conservation Committee, but maybe that's something that we can help
mhm.
get. Or, and Michele, I don't know if Pete or you or anybody, we're having the Northern Wild Sheep and Goat Council meeting late April, early May in Anchorage this year. I don't know if there's any abstracts that have been submitted. I think so, but that might be a good opportunity to put that protocol, maybe make a handout or something and make that available to everybody in the room. And we're expecting anywhere from 100 to 200 people in person in Anchorage.
Nice. Yeah, Patty Brewster, the one that's doing our microbiome and the one that did the new PCR primers, she is going to be there. So she's gonna hopefully do some poop plugs for us to get us some more. So
Yeah, but if you guys can, refine that protocol, maybe that would
yeah,
be good to disseminate.
Mhm.
sure.
And the other thing is, I could probably send it out through that e-news network on the Northern Sheep and Goat Council, and that goes to 700 people.
Mhm.
Yeah, I can send you that. There is a little write-up in there. So
Excellent. Yeah, I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. I'm not sure if any of our other attendees here have any questions for you, Michele.
Hear me right now?
Yep, we can hear you.
I only just figured out how to get unmuted. That's right.
Oh, perfect.
I'm not used to this stuff. So when you're talking about the old scat and the fresh scat, I'm not clearly understanding, like you get the scat from the animal that you've captured, right? So how does it get to be old? Is it just in transit or?
yeah, so what we do is we take the scats from the animal during capture, and then, I mean, after a certain point, you know, they've been sitting in the fridge or freezer and they get kind of freezer burned.
I see.
So
Okay.
what we found is that we were keeping them in like a regular freezer, which is how we keep most of our scats. And those, your regular like house fridge actually goes through kind of freeze thaw cycles, and that damages bacteria that's present in them. And so after a certain point, the bacteria will all die off. And that hasn't been a problem for us in the past, because normally we're training dogs to scats just based on the animal. So like we're just training you on bighorn sheep scat. We're just training you on bear scat. And the like the oils and stuff that are present that make an animal scat smell like them do not degrade, but the bacteria degrades. And so this year we actually purchased a -80 freezer, and so that is going to keep the bacteria preserved, and it doesn't go through those freeze thaw cycles. So we're hoping to have better preservation from this point forward. But yeah, that was a little learning curve. And then as I said too, we want to age some scats just like outside as well, and see if like after a 1 week period that bacteria dies, or after a 2 week period, just so that when we take the dogs out on the landscape and are trying to do some of this disease work, we know if a scat is too old that they can't tell. And that's just important for us, because maybe we want to like go in where there's already some collared animals and we know that those scats would be fresher, that kind of thing. So it's just kind of helping us to inform how we use the dogs.
So ideally, you just have the dog there, right there, while you're collecting the scats
Yeah.
in the field.
And that's also like one of the only ways that we can really do individual stuff too. But we just hope for the scats that we can do it as a non-invasive method as well. But yeah, that's kind of why we're doing these swabs and stuff too, is just so that we can kind of see. Because it's like if the dogs are 100% accurate on the bacterial cultures, if they can just do that extremely well, then I mean, that kind of informs us that's like, okay, scat is good, and maybe we can continue to kind of practice this, but we know that we can be the fastest and most effective tool as just a dog swab sniffer kind of thing at captures.
Yeah.
And I mean, it is likely that captures are going to continue regardless, just because you can get so much information at these captures that you could never get non-invasively. And you know, those GPS collars that you put on animals, you just get so much movement data and home ranges that it's likely it's going to continue anyway. So it's not bad for us to also be an animal side testing method.
Michele, going back to one of the points you made about trying different subspecies, you know, I'm just wondering whether it's Froilan down in Texas or Ann in Arizona, you know, some of the desert country, that was a lot of interest in seeing, you know, do those samples desiccate, dry out, you know, devolve faster in those drier, arid environments. But I'm just wondering, coming up here next month, there's going to be probably 20 or more stone sheep caught up in northwestern British Columbia at Spatsizi in the first half of March, and then another down on the Peace Arm of the Williston in BC. And so, to your knowledge, working with Kylie Thacker or Helen Schwancha, the current and the past vets, I'll see them next week in Penticton. Stacy, maybe we can talk up there, but I'm just wondering if there's going to be, if you guys have made any arrangements or contacts on getting samples out of those stone sheep or desert sheep, because I know Dall sheep, there's not a lot of captures going on. Dall sheep are in a bit of a world of hurt, and Yukon was going to capture a bunch, and they abandoned that project. So don't think Dall sheep samples are going to be available, but possibly stone sheep and certainly desert bighorn.
Okay. Yeah. I made some contacts at the sheep show with California, and they are going to send us some samples next year during their captures. So those should be some desert bighorns. And then Nate LaHue is going to send us some samples as well out of Nevada. And I think maybe there was someone else in Arizona that was going to send us some samples.
Possibly Ann Justice Allen.
Yeah, or maybe Clint. I don't know, I guess where he's out of. But yeah. Yeah, and I have to send, Helen asked for our new protocol, so I've got to send her that as well.
I'll see her at that disease workshop in Penticton next Thursday, a week from today. But
okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great effort. A lot of jurisdictions are pulling together, trying to get samples for these guys to train the dogs with, test their methodologies. And, you know, being animal side at the captures is awesome. Last year, Nebraska and South Dakota, it's all a matter of time and dogs and budget and capacity, but we're doing whatever we can to try and boost that sample collection and sharing samples and data.
Yeah, we appreciate that. Yeah, because like I said, the samples with the we need that PCR and ELISA, and we're going to start moving away from needing that ELISA, but it's been hard because a lot of the samples that we get, you know, you like maybe don't have an ELISA, you only have the PCR, and then so those samples go into storage for future use, but can't use them on dogs that are new for training, because there's this whole progression of teaching them, like it kind of has to start easier and then get harder. And so that's why we do the positive, negative, and then move into other samples that, you know, are maybe sick from another disease or have just gotten over MOVI, that kind of thing. So, yeah.
I guess the other comment I'd make is my relatively short history with Working Dogs for Conservation is you guys are getting more and more requests for assistance and, you know, different projects, whether it's invasive plants or you name it, you know, human stuff, animal, wildlife disease stuff. Are you able to keep up? You know, I mean, if you guys increase your staff, increase the number of dogs, increased, you know, how are you keeping up with that increasing workload?
I mean, we're trying. We have gotten a couple new people, but there's still only about 5 of us that actually do the field work of running the dogs. One of those being me. So yeah, it can be difficult. And we do turn down a lot of projects, unfortunately, but yeah, there's certain projects that we always make time for. And, you know, yeah, we try to just do as much as we can, but we are a small organization. There's some more conservation dog organizations popping up, but they are a lot smaller. They usually have like 1 or 2 people, and a lot of times the humans are not, like they're seasonal. They aren't there every year. So, but yeah, WD4C's definitely got the most experience behind them.
Wonderful. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. I'm not sure if any of our other attendees have any questions for you, Michele. But I think we can, I think that's it. So yeah, thank you so much, Michele. Thank you so much for taking time out of your obviously busy schedule with WD4C. Yeah, it sounds like a really, really cool project, and I'm really excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And if anybody does think of any questions, they can